Hello again, everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, it's been a minute since you and I have done a Silver Bullets podcast. It was a little quiet through part of the summer, part of the off-season. You and I are not used to doing off-season pods, so it was a little different for us, and then we ran into a little bit of a dead spell, and we decided to just take a few weeks off and regroup, and then I think all of the things happened in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it certainly seemed like, okay, like the vast majority of the news coming out was naturally built around the recruiting camps and visits, and understandably so. I mean, it was kind of like this pent up, opportunities for a lot of these young men to finally visit Ohio State and other schools. And then the next thing you know, it just seemed like a massive explosion of news and rumors and stories that over the last couple of weeks. So I thought, yeah, it's a good time for us to resume as we're heading into fall camp with Ohio State. And, the next thing you know, we're going to be right back at it.
Yeah, you and I are recording this on the eve of fall camp. It's crazy because you and I were expecting like a lot of commitments that we could talk about, and then it just kind of was delayed. Like all these commitments ended up getting delayed, and then all these, once we pulled the plug, they all started happening all at once.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. I mean, like, I know that I guess I just presumed that there was going to be a flood of Ohio State commitments, and that really hasn't been the case. That's not an indictment on the Ohio State coaching staff. It's certainly not an indictment on the young men. I really thought that there was going to be this mass of, when we were told, oh, like so many players are coming, and it just really hasn't materialized yet in the form of massive recruiting commitments. But I have every confidence in Ryan Day and the coaching staff that the recruiting is going fine.
Yeah, although, Ryan Day, I don't know what he's doing wrong, but he lost a 2022 commitment today. That was the big news of the day, that big prize from the 2022 class is no longer in that class for Ohio State.
Yeah, he's slipping. I don't know what we're going to do.
Of course, we're talking about the Quinn Ewers reclassification, and now Quinn is going to enroll in, at Ohio State this fall, and that definitely changes things moving forward at Ohio State. This is a situation where you kind of thought you'd have that year of separation, and now you don't have that year of separation, and it's a good move for Quinn Ewers because now he can partake of the NIL stuff, which is maybe something that you and I hadn't thought of as being part of that, but also we didn't realize how far along he was in his schooling either. So this is good for the player. I'm not sure in the long term how good this will be for Ohio State, but for right now, it looks great in the Ohio State quarterback room. I just don't know how long it's going to stay looking this good in the Ohio State quarterback room.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of, let's just say, built up expectations around Quinn Ewers. I mean, you're talking about a generational talent at the quarterback position, and understandably, Ohio State fans are, naturally excited. You can count me among them, but I would also kind of want to temper those expectations with the fact that as talented as Quinn Ewers is, that he is coming into a already talented, very inexperienced, but very, very talented quarterback room, and to presume that he'll be able to win that starting job. Some people, I've seen that on social media. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it. I think it would just be better to just kind of temper those expectations and try and put Quinn Ewers in a more realistic view as we go into fall camp.
It seems to me this would be a situation where he would redshirt or gray shirt or whatever for a year. He would sit out and just basically collect NIL money. And we talked about C.J. Stroud probably having the leg up in the quarterback race, but if you have 3 5 stars in that room and not everybody can play, I fully expect that when it's all said and done, at least 2 guys will transfer.
I hope you're wrong. I'm merely saying that from the Ohio State fan in me, that I hope you're wrong, but I also believe that you're probably right, that at some point with again, let's just kind of play this out, that CJ Stroud is the presumed starter going into fall camp. It hasn't been announced that, but most speculation is that CJ Stroud is the presumed starter. Now, as we started off talking about with Quinn Ewers, the hope was, all right, there would be a year in between, potentially between CJ Stroud and Quinn Ewers. And now that doesn't seem to be happening. We're not really sure, okay, is Quinn Ewers going to gray shirt? Is Quinn Ewers going to red shirt? What kind of plans do the coaching staff have for Quinn Ewers? I mean, there's a lot that has to be sorted out, simply because when I look at it as and it's impossible being an Ohio State fan, but when I think realistically, when I think about, all right, well, Quinn Ewers is coming in and he's arguably the most talented quarterback recruit in Ohio State football history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you look at CJ Stroud, and I'm going to politely put Jack Miller in the same category, they've been there for well over a year. They truly have, now granted, very minimal game experience. I mean, we talked about it on previous podcasts where, they've handed off the ball, but they really don't have a lot of game experience, but they do have that experience with working with Ryan Day, with Corey Dennis, working with the other players in the program, that I think that you can't discount that year in advance.
Right.
Now, when you throw in Kyle McCord, one of those aforementioned 5 stars that you're talking about, that I think the idea of somebody who has 6 months worth of experience, that's where I just think you have to kind of temper the expectations that Quinn Ewers is going to come in and win this job. When, I mean, let's face it, we're arguably like a month away from the start of the season. I not saying that it can't happen. I just would be tremendously surprised if it did happen.
Yeah, we are a month, as we record this on August 2nd, we are a month out from the September 2nd kickoff at Minnesota. And like you mentioned, you've got Miller and Stroud and McCord. These guys are all freshmen in terms of eligibility. 2 redshirt freshmen, Miller and Stroud, and a true freshman in McCord, true freshman now in Quinn Ewers. And it just doesn't seem likely that he would be able to win a starting job in a month. But I mean, who knows? Maybe he's just that advanced. I would say, like you, I would temper the Quinn Ewers expectations for the moment. I certainly expect this to be C.J. Stroud's team, and you would have thought, C.J. Stroud a year or two, then Kyle McCord, or maybe Jack Miller. And I figured maybe either Jack Miller or Kyle McCord would transfer down the line, and that's even without Quinn Ewers. And now Quinn Ewers is coming in and could jump those guys within a year. And so that's why I think that 2 quarterbacks will transfer eventually, and it might be one this year, and it might be another one next year when we see how things play out. It also kind of affects recruiting the position, because the 2022 and 2023 classes, to add a quarterback to come in, a high-profile quarterback to come in, knowing that a Quinn Ewers will be in front of them, that might make things a little more difficult for Ryan Day.
I certainly believe it's going to make things that much more difficult, because as great of a quarterback guru Ryan Day and the Ohio State offensive coaching staff are, and it's evidenced by the fact that these young men, they all know about each other, obviously, that they want to come and be they want to come and be taught well, by Ryan Day, by Corey Dennis, by the coaches within the staff.
Right.
But at some point, there's going to be a player that is going to look at this depth chart, and they'll be thinking, I can come in and win that job. I don't care who Quinn Ewers is, and I'm sure that they have, because the great ones always have that kind of role, that kind of cocky competitive fire and nature to them. But there will also be the guy that's going to have not only that, but they'll say, okay, but I could also go to fill in the blank. Like it could be, and again, it's not, they might be willing to sacrifice going to being taught by Ryan Day if, and this is some things like some other podcasts on Buckeye Scoop kind of mentioned, once Steve Sarkisian starts, I'm not saying he's going to be as successful as he was when he was at Alabama. But once Sarkisian starts kind of making his imprint upon the Texas program, will somebody look at that and be like, okay, well, that depth chart doesn't look nearly as competitive? Or, and you could go around. I mean, like, I know that Oklahoma has a pretty stacked quarterback room. Where I'm going with this is that by and large, a lot of these kids are going to be like, okay, I really want to play for Ryan Day, but the road to playing time is that much faster, and I can still be successful if I go elsewhere. Like Alabama, I just referenced it. It just seems, kind of, that it's one of these things where, man, like a kid might think, all right, Nick Saban, despite all of the quarterback losses, the coaching losses, I was going to say coaching staff losses, that he's always bringing in good coaches. And this might be worth going there instead of being tutored by Ryan Day.
Yeah, and you look at these guys, and they're all basically the same year. You've got C.J. Stroud, redshirt freshman; Jack Miller, redshirt freshman; Kyle McCord, freshman; Quinn Ewers, incoming freshman. At some point, one of those guys wins the job, and then everybody else has to go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And I think that's when your first domino falls, is when the first realization is that you didn't win the job that you thought you were going to win. And even though you might be talented enough to win it next year, right now you're the backup. You might get in the, in the game when it's out of hand. But then again, you might not be number 2. You might be number 3. Some of these guys, if you have 3 5-stars, there's going to be a 5-star that's at least Chip in the third string quarterback.
And one of the things that is also, I mean, it's so different now than it used to be in previous years, is the fact that you can technically play in up to 4 games and still redshirt. And where I'm going with this is, let's just say hypothetically, okay, because you're absolutely right, is that whoever is the presumed starter. So we'll, just for the sake of discussion, I'm not saying definitively that this is going to be the case, but like CJ Stroud is the starter, and one of those aforementioned 5-stars is the backup. I'm just speculating here that whoever's the third string guy, you not only want to keep them for depth, but you also want to kind of try and say, hey, just because you're the third string doesn't mean that you're not going to play, because let's face it. I mean, Ohio State is so stacked with talent that there are going to be games where you're up, 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, whatever. And it's like, okay, it's time to set the starters out. And it's, all right, this is the opportunity for whoever that third string quarterback, 5-star, rating coming out of high school. this is an opportunity for you to play and still be classified as a red shirt. You know what I mean? Like it's gonna be interesting. I mean, like, like this might, again, I'm not saying this is going to be the case, but this might be the opportunity to, okay, for those of you who were kind of dreading, the eventual massacre of Akron at the end of September, because I mean, we joke about it, but it's true, is like, this might be for all we know, like this could be the vaunted debut of Quinn Ewers in Ohio Stadium, because why not? Why not give him this is a chance to kind of give him some game repetition, and you're still not necessarily upsetting the quarterback depth chart per se, in terms of, well, he didn't earn it and all those kind of things that might possibly be thought or said in that quarterback room at Ohio State.
And one thing that Ryan Day will probably do is he will play his cards close to the vest. You might see, when it comes time for the second string quarterback, one week you might see Kyle McCord. The next week you might see Jack Miller. Kind of like this past year, if memory serves, first quarterback off the bench was Jack Miller. In the first time that they used a backup quarterback, and then after that it was C.J. Stroud.
Precisely, and we've talked about this before. And I agree with you that I think Ryan Day is going to keep this close to the vest in terms of who is number two. The dreaded Orr on the depth chart. I know how much Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, no pun intended, Tom, how much they despise that that concept of Orr. But getting back to it, that it might be, when we've talked about this in previous podcasts, where all the quarterbacks, regardless of if we're talking C.J. Stroud through Quinn Ewers, no matter how they line up, have very minimal experience. And when I say talk about this on previous podcasts, the idea of letting those quarterbacks come in and run the offense. And what I mean is, not necessarily like chucking the ball for the end zone when you're up by 40 points, but okay, we're going to work on our short to intermediate passing game. We're going to work on, hitting the backs out of the backfield, or, tight end, like trying to improve our play action passes to the tight ends or something like that. And if that Quinn Ewers comes in, and let's say that short to intermediate passing game, where it results in one of the, by the way, talented wide receivers who are also backups gets in and he breaks it 50, 60 yards. That's not on Ryan Day, in my estimation. You're not going to tell these guys, you're going to tell them to go in and stink. I mean, you're not going to tell them to play badly, because they want more playing time. You need to get them ready. But I think there's a difference between, okay, I'm going to bomb it out, and Quinn Ewers incidentally could do it, 60, 70 yards in the air, and you run deep underneath it. And okay, we're going to work on our offense, but also get these guys some playing time. And if they score unnecessary touchdowns, that's not on Ohio State, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it is something that Ryan Day maybe should have done a little more of last year. Getting these quarterbacks ready, throwing the ball more. Even if you're up big, it's not a reflection on you. You have to do what's best for your football team, and what is best for his football team is to make sure that if something happens to your starter, your backup's ready to go. So if you throw an out route to, I don't know, Jaden Ballard, let's say, and he takes it to the house, just a little 7-yard route, and he turns upfield and scores, it's not running up. That's not running up the score. It's not going for style points. It's just a byproduct of trying to run your offense and get these guys to learn your offense, and they have to do that, because any one particular play can change your depth chart, and none of these guys have any experience. It's funny too, if you look at the quarterbacks on this team, and I don't have Quinn Ewers' stats in front of me. Kyle McCord is 6'3", 210. C.J. Stroud is 6'3", 215. Jack Miller is 6'3", 215. I think Ryan Day has a type, and it's right in that 6'3" range. I think Kyle McCord is 5 pounds lighter because he hasn't been in Mickey Maratti's weight program as long as the other two. But I also have to ask you this, Chip. Are we saying definitively that the starting quarterback this year is not Jagger LaRoe or JP Andrade?
I feel comfortable as we record this. Yes, I would say that. Yeah, Jagger and JP are the quintessential good soldiers for the program. They're soaking up all of the coaching from Ryan Day and Corey Dennis, and yeah, I feel comfortable saying that they are there to make sure that they're effectively running the scout team. But yeah, it's going to be it's of the other quarterbacks we've discussed, it's not going to be JP or Jagger.
All right. Well, that's a bold take, and you heard it here first, folks. This is not going to be Jagger LaRoe or JP Andrade starting against Minnesota.
I feel comfortable with that one.
You're standing by that. Okay.
Yeah.
Bold predictions. We haven't even done a bold prediction show. That's sort of Tom and Tony's thing. So yeah, it's an interesting situation that Ryan Day has for him. I'm sure he's had conversations with Quinn Ewers and his family regarding this decision and coming in early. I would think that since he was going to be in high school this year anyway, that the plan will be come in, see what you can do, probably going to redshirt you. And I think that's how you keep maybe Kyle McCord a little happier because he gets that year maybe of getting on the field a little more. And CJ, and of course, whoever CJ Stroud, Jack Miller, we assume CJ Stroud because he was a leg up last year. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but whoever doesn't get the starting position, the other one of them in that redshirt freshman year would also probably be a little placated by that decision as well. I would think.
I agree. I think it's gonna be so challenging for Ryan Day to try and keep everyone happy. I mean, with the fact that the transfer portal is there and they all kind of can see kind of potentially where things are headed. And let's face it, I think with fall camp starting, it's going to be, I'm sure social media is going to be, okay, well, who was running with the ones and who got to do this? And that's a big if the media is even allowed in to see what the practice is, what they are looking like. So I think it's going to be for the next few weeks trying to keep all the quarterbacks engaged and interested. And then I'm not saying necessarily a specific date, but I'm just going to estimate, probably like in the middle of August, because we're, like, as you said, we're recording this on August 2nd, that, like maybe 2 weeks from now. And this is not in that bold prediction category that that maybe we'll get some kind of idea as to who is going to start, so you can actually put in who you designate as the first team offense and getting them as much repetition as possible before kickoff on the night of September 2nd at Minnesota.
All right. Well, I think the depth chart for Minnesota when it comes out that week will be. I almost said that Friday, but it's not. It's a weeknight game. I almost said that, but I didn't. I caught myself, so I gotta make sure that I stay strong because those non-Saturday games are weird. I think that we're going to see a depth chart that says C.J. Stroud or Jack Miller or Kyle McCord and possibly or Quinn Ewers.
That would be something. If we had all of them listed as or, that would be, I think, on one hand, maybe a Ryan Day trying to keep everyone happy, and then kind of the conspiracy theorist in me is that, well, maybe nobody's really distinguishing themselves.
Yeah.
And that would, which would be alarming, so we'll see. I mean, it's just one of these things where you and I have been around long enough and I realize completely different set of circumstances, but, back, and I'm just thinking that after Craig Krenzel graduated, how it was, all right, is it going to be Justin Zwick or is it going to be Troy Smith? And Jim Trussell deliberately did not announce until the week of that Justin Zwick was going to be the starter, with the caveat that Troy would play. And then we all know how that all turned out. And that was all, everything worked out. It's just that with the transfer portal, I think, and we all know how inexperienced the quarterback position is. It's very talented, but very inexperienced. That I think Ryan Day is going to do everything within his power to try and keep them all engaged and interested and believing that they can be the starter for this team. I just don't know when he's going to start separating his starter from the backups just to get that starter ready for the game at Minnesota.
Yeah, I thought you were only going to go as far back as, the battle that we had for J.T. Barrett and Cardale Jones. I thought you were only going to go that far back, but you went further back than I thought you were.
Well, the J.T. Barrett, that one, in my humble opinion, was an example of how not to do it. Because let's face it, I just, again, I'm sure I'm hurting Urban Meyer's feelings, as he's busy getting his Jacksonville Jaguars team ready. But in all seriousness,
he's going to turn off the podcast, Chip. Come on.
Yeah. In all seriousness, I think that helped to cause a lot of disruption on an extremely talented team that it wasn't necessary. Like, I think, as it proved to be, that J.T. Barrett, for the style of offense that Urban Meyer preferred to run when he was more involved in the offensive game plan, J.T. Barrett fit his style. And the fact that now that Ryan Day, ever since he came into the Ohio State program and took it over, I think it's very accurate when you say that, okay, he has a certain style, he has a certain, these guys kind of all physically have a certain stature and resemblance to each other in terms of what he likes and what he wants. And I just think that it's going to be, who is leading the team, who's not turning the ball over. I mean, who seems to have the command of the huddle, all these things that go beyond, just, throwing the ball.
Right.
I mean,
getting out of bad plays, getting into good plays, minimizing the damage when the defense is, set up in a way that, foils what you would plan to call, that kind of thing. That's really what J.T. Barrett did really well. He got Ohio State out of negative plays before the snap, and that's a big part of who will eventually emerge as the leader of this team. But when earlier when I said that Ryan Day will keep this close to the vest, I don't just mean from the media, from the fans. I mean, he would like these guys to all believe that they are maybe a notch higher than they are on the pecking order. So, like I said, you might see him put in, if C.J. Stroud is the starter, maybe you might see Kyle McCord go in as the second stringer one week, and maybe Jack Miller another week, to make these guys think, I think I might be the second team quarterback. I'm not really sure, kind of thing, and give them likewise reps in practice that way.
Easily, yeah. I have no doubt that will be something that, the way you said, like, to kind of have them believing in themselves that they are closer to that, that starting position or that second string position, more than they probably realize. I mean, it's going to be interesting, to say the least, just because put it this way, it was going to be interesting even before the news of Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, for sure. That's been the talk. That this quarterback battle has been the talk for basically since since Justin Fields said I'm going pro. I mean,
right. So now, yeah, let's just pour some major gas on that fire and get it really roaring. Now, with the highly touted 5-star quarterback coming in a year earlier than anticipated.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe Tate Martell will transfer back in, and then it'll be a fifth guy.
There you go.
It's bound to happen at some point.
Yeah, I wish him well at UNLV, which is that's kind of when you think about it, and I mean this with all sincerity to Tate Martell, is probably where he should have stayed in the. I mean, like he could have just. You want to talk about now? I realize like NIL was not a thing, but he truly could have. I mean, in terms of if he had stayed there, and then going into, I guess, what would now be his senior year, that like the idea of with NIL, especially out in Las Vegas. I mean, I can't even imagine what he would be able to capitalize upon. So, but I wish Tate Martell well, and all the quarterbacks at Ohio State well. I think it's gonna be interesting to say the least.
Chip, Tate Martell has thrown a perfect game at Ohio State, so how dare you? You put some respect on his name.
I said with all sincerity that he should have stayed at UNLV.
I'm saying you say it. You should stay at UNLV. A guy with a perfect game at Ohio State should stay at UNLV. I think we'll never know how good Tate Martell could have been at Ohio State. I think that's the real shame of it. He might have been a dumpster fire inside of a tire fire, but he might have been great. We'll never know. That's the whole thing.
I kind of look at it like I think Ryan Day knew, which is why.
Well, and the thing is, he may not have been a Ryan Day type.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole 5'10". Urban Meyer loved him, and I'm sure if Urban Meyer and I'm going to say Tom Herman, if Tom Herman had, was still around, because Tom Herman had an affinity for shifty mobile quarterbacks. And that's not to say that Ryan Day doesn't let his quarterback run, but I mean, it's a marked difference in terms of the frequency of quarterback runs under Ryan Day than anything that we ever saw when Urban Meyer and Tom Herman were in charge of the offense.
Indeed. So it'll be interesting to see who gets the call. We think it'll be C.J. Stroud, but until we get to the Minnesota game, we don't know for sure. And because of how close these guys are and how talented they all are, it could be any of them. And that's kind of the interesting thing, and that's why this is quarterback apocalypse 2021 taking place here. And Chip, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got 4 quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback.
That's right. That's why I'm saying if we see that depth chart of or all throughout, it's just going to set the alarm bells ringing. Like, oh my gosh, nobody's distinguishing themselves, and what's this going to do to Ohio State's national championship hopes and things like that? So, Let's see.
Well, good luck to Ryan Day, because he has got the biggest challenge that I think any coach has ever had in terms of quarterbacking and keeping everyone happy. If he only loses one of these guys to a transfer over the next few years, he's done a masterful job.
Oh, I completely agree. I think I hope you're mistaken, and I mean that in the sense that when you say probably 2, but you're probably right. But yeah, if he only loses 1, then he's done an amazing job.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the college football world, including crazy stuff we didn't even anticipate having to talk about a few weeks ago when we did our last show. We didn't know we were getting into realignment and all of that stuff again so soon, but here we are. So we're going to get into that topic right after this. And we're back, Chip. The college football landscape is changing again. After not very long ago, we saw some realignment stuff happening. We saw Texas A&M try to get away from Texas and Oklahoma and go to the SEC. We saw Missouri break off, and now it seems like everybody's joining the SEC.
Like the dramatic, for lack of a better word, tectonic plates of college football. Like the shifting of the ground underneath your feet. With all of a sudden now Texas and Oklahoma wanting to be in the SEC. I mean, it's dramatically altering the complete landscape of college football as we know it.
What is Texas's thinking here? Because this is a school that literally has its own television network, and it is it's the wealthy. What do you call it? What am I looking for? The old school rich person in the neighborhood that's, I know they want to be more successful at football than they've been. That's why they keep, shuffling through coach after coach after, mediocre seasons. But I'm not sure what they get, and I'm not sure that moving to this conference is going to fix their problems.
I agree with you. I mean, when you think about it, and again, we're going back a ways, but think about it. This is, and I want to give a tip of the hat, to, again, when we talk about some of the other podcasts on Buckeye Scoop, the Scoopcast, that when you think about Texas, they were originally back in the day in the Southwestern Conference,
mm-hmm.
and they decided to leave that, which left that conference to die.
Yep.
And then they joined, they took, obviously, they took, some teams from the SWC into the Big 12.
Right. It was the Big Eight. It was the Big Eight, and then it became the Big 12. Yep.
It became the Big 12 and became such a divisive force within the Big 12 that all of a sudden Nebraska was like, we're out of here. Colorado, same thing. Like they went to the Pac-12.
Yeah.
You talked about, and so now it's like they're on their third conference. So not that I think that they will have the ability to be as disruptive as they were in their previous, but yeah, it's a puzzling thing because Texas, wanting to play in the SEC, when you think about the heavyweights that are in the SEC, like when they were in the Big 12, granted, they had their challenges and difficulties, but at least they were far more competitive. I think they're going into a far more difficult situation than they really have contemplated, all for, I think, just kind of with the belief that, and they may be mistaken, that their access to the potentially expanded college football playoff might be easier, but I don't see how that's going to work out.
What I hear you saying, Chip, is that Texas is the Manchurian candidate, and they are going to destroy the SEC from within.
The Manchurian Candidate. That's a great movie. I don't think they can. I really don't think they can. I think they're tired of watching a lot of the talented players from the state of Texas go to the SEC, and they're thinking, okay, well, we want to be, we want to keep those same players, playing for us in Austin. So why not just join them? But I'm thinking, like, I don't like those players that they want to win. And as you said, they've cycled through so many coaches in their quest to be kind of, what they were, 40, 50 years ago. And I apologize. I mean, I realize that Texas won the national title after the 2005 season, but let's face it. I mean, you're talking 16 years ago.
Yeah. Vince Young's not walking through that door.
Right. And when you talk about Vince Young, it's weird to think about, but like when you say, 16 years ago, all right, that meant that the incoming freshmen were 2 years old when Vince Young helped win that title. They have no memory of Vince Young and Texas being a dominant factor in the national title race.
Yeah, it's the thing about Texas is this: if they wanted to be a player, all they had to do was be better than Oklahoma. That's all they had to do. Now they have to be better than a whole lot of other teams. They have to be better than Texas A&M. They have to be better than LSU. They have to be better than Alabama. They have, even with an expanded playoff, their hurdles are much, much higher than they were. And just beating Oklahoma and just being better than Oklahoma, as difficult as that was, and obviously it was not something that they were able to accomplish. It's going to be exponentially harder now. And Oklahoma, likewise, they were sitting pretty. They were the Clemson of the middle of the country. All we got to do is run the table like we do every year, and we're in. And the only time that Oklahoma wasn't in the college football playoff is when they would get upset, once or twice over the course of the season. Maybe they would lose to Texas. Maybe they would lose to, Oklahoma State or something along the way, or they'd get upset by a TCU or somebody. Somebody would jump up and grab them, and if they stumbled that second time, then they wouldn't be in the college football playoff. But they almost had a free pass, so I don't know what they benefit from this. These kids in the South are not going to go to Oklahoma because Oklahoma's SEC, baby. They're going to continue going to Florida and Alabama and Georgia and all those schools.
When you look at Oklahoma, let's face it. Lincoln Riley. We were in the previous segment singing the praises of Ryan Day, and deservedly so. Well, Lincoln Riley has also kind of earned a reputation of developing quarterbacks. Let's face it. When you've got Baker Mayfield, you've got Kyler Murray. They've got they can point to the fact that we can develop quarterbacks, get them into the NFL. You can be playing for championships. But I agree with you that, it was kind of a weird thing where when Texas and Oklahoma, when the Big 12 almost died because of a potential merger with the Pac-10, you know what I mean? Like Pac, like when they were threatening to do that 10 years ago, that all of a sudden, like the Big 12 was able to kind of hold the line and, okay, keep Texas pacified, and okay, we've got everybody on board going forward, and then it seemed like they had stabilized themselves, and it's just like, I agree. It doesn't seem to make a lot of success for the simple, a lot of long-term success for either program. With the only thing I can think of is that with the potentially expanded college football playoff, because by making these moves, I'm not sure if you saw, but Gene Smith is kind of, he's saying like, hey, we might need to slow down on the discussions for the college football playoff, because this is just kind of thrown everything out of whack. I just think they kind of think that their path to being involved in the college football playoff is easier, and that they will be making more money as a member of the SEC. But I'm not entirely sure that, be careful what you wish for. I think this is going to be a lot more difficult than they really anticipated.
Yeah, it's easy to look and see, okay, Texas A&M is in the SEC. They've had some success. But it hasn't been like that every year. They've gone through a couple coaches before they started to really gain a foothold and get some traction. So it's not like this is an automatic thing. Jimbo Fisher's come in there and has done a pretty good job. But this is it's just a very interesting thing. And you got to think that Texas A&M, they've got to be livid. They did this to get away from Texas,
And the thing about Jimbo Fisher is, he was paid big time money to bolt from Florida State to come to Texas A&M. From what I seem to recall reading, is Jimbo Fisher always had, I guess, this longing for the SEC. Back from his days as an assistant at LSU under Nick Saban.
Mm-hmm.
And so he kind of looked at this was his opportunity to kind of build Texas A&M into a formidable SEC team. So now, yeah, like you said, they have to be livid because, all right, a lot of those, like he can't look any kid in the face and tell them, yeah, like if you come and play for Texas A&M, you get to play in the SEC, and no other Texas program can make that claim. Well, now that's gonna fall. He's gonna have to regroup and rethink his whole recruiting strategy, at least for Texas talent.
So here's the thing: it's if those two schools bolt and go to the SEC as expected. I know everybody's saying, "Oh, the Big Ten's got to make the next move." I don't know that that's necessarily true. Does the Big Ten have to make a move?
I don't want to say have to. I think, all of the. It's definitely the kind of thing where I think you need to look around and kind of gauge, is there interest? But I don't have to is a pretty strong word. I think you want to kind of make sure that everything is in order within the Big Ten. And like how do you compare and how do you stack up against the SEC? Because let's face it, the SEC and the Big Ten are the two best conferences. I mean, we could talk about the ACC. Like the Big 12 is I don't want to say collapsing, but it's
what happens to the Big 12 if those two signature schools leave, your premier programs leave? Can this conference exist as a conference with Kansas State, Iowa State, et cetera, Oklahoma State? I mean, it seems like you're now talking about a conference that's dropping into the group of five.
Oh, I certainly believe that that's a possibility. As we were recording this, and it's not anything, again, it's just all rumors and hearsay and whispers, but the idea that I referenced the old SWC, the idea of, all right, you had all these Texas oriented programs. There's some speculation that in order to get back to, what they had, not that they would call it the SWC, mind you, but like that there's some belief that, hey, they might, try to get SMU. They may try to get Houston the way that they had it before. And again, they don't have both of those programs. Don't have nearly the kind of cachet that Texas and Oklahoma do, but to try and hold on to a conference, because with the way that the way it's looking is that other conferences, there are rumblings that the American Conference is possibly thinking of trying to poach teams. West Virginia is possibly thinking of leaving the Big 12 to go to the ACC. I mean, it's one of these things where the Big 12, I think, is going to do everything they can to try to make it through this round of realignment. But you're right. I mean, it certainly falls into that, that lower echelon, of conferences when you think about it.
So the ACC, they are, to my understanding, aren't they locked in to their current deal? The member schools there, aren't they locked in till something like 2035?
You got it. Very good. Very good.
Without having, some kind of legal battle to separate from that league, they can't go anywhere. They're kind of set in stone. So you continue to have Clemson, who can just run the table and get into the college football playoff every year. You've got Notre Dame out there. And Notre Dame, of course, it makes way too much sense for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. So it's obviously never going to happen.
Yeah.
But that is the school that makes the most sense, not only from a scholastic standpoint, but also from an academic standpoint. The standards are met there, and of course, the Big Ten somewhat handcuffs itself with its member schools by requiring AAU membership.
Yes, I agree with everything you said. You're right that the grant of rights that the ACC signed with ESPN is through the 2035/2036, I guess you would say, school year. I mean, it's kind of weird to think about it that way. So there is no, I mean, because when you think about academically, you just brought up the AAU, the Association of American Universities. There are certainly, when you think about some prestigious academic universities that belong to the ACC, such as North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, that would be ideal for the Big Ten to approach. It's not going to happen because of that grant of rights that won't be realized until that 2035, 2036 year. Notre Dame, like you said, is a perfect example. Even though they don't have AAU membership, geographically, academically, all these things that would make sense, Notre Dame, I'm going to give them credit because, hey, when we talk about this potential expanded college football playoff, they negotiated for the fact that, and they did it deliberately. I mean, they were smart enough to say, yeah, we don't care about that. We don't have to be a conference winner as long as like we're in the top, I guess you would say, 5 through 9 seeding. They would still get to host a playoff. That's what they want to do. They don't care about winning a conference. They care about hosting a home playoff game. So that's Notre Dame. As much as it makes sense, it's not going to happen. So, that's why, getting back to like one of your original questions, does the Big Ten have to do something? I don't think it's necessarily a have to, but I think it probably behooves the Big Ten to gauge interest, or better yet, since I'm sure you saw the cease and desist letter that Bob Bowlesby of the Big 12 commissioner sent to ESPN on behalf of the whole issue with Texas and Oklahoma and the SEC, basically saying that ESPN kind of is trying to make the Big 12 dissolve, that other schools that might be interested in Big Ten membership. I think the Big Ten certainly needs to kind of keep their eyes and ears open, but certainly not necessarily make the first step. I think other schools and universities need to make that first step to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think there's some difficulty involved with any expansion. Just to expand, expansion for expansion's sake doesn't make any sense. If you look solely at AAU schools, and I know they've covered this on the weekly Buckeye Weekly podcast, there's really nothing that doesn't force you to expand into a third time zone. The conference will have to expand into at least the Mountain Time Zone. And I'm not sure that anything really moves the needle in the way that Jim Delaney likes to move the needle. Obviously, he's not the commissioner anymore. But, Jim Delaney might say, ooh, Boston University. They're an AAU school, and we can get in that Boston market. And I don't mean the restaurant. I mean the television market. But if you look around and you look at, Kansas doesn't move the needle. You go a little bit further out, and you've got Oregon's way out in the Pacific time zone, Utah, Colorado. These are pretty far west, and none of them are exciting in the way that adding a Texas and Oklahoma is exciting.
Yeah, I agree. You don't want to necessarily expand just to expand, because I'm sure our listeners saw that, like, the popular rumor making the rounds was Kansas. And, that was, and I agree that Kansas, yeah, they're an AAU member, but they're not. You don't get excited about Kansas football. I mean, it's just not, and it's not anything that is, you don't counter the seismic moves of Texas and Oklahoma with bringing in Kansas and Iowa State, which was the other Big 12 team that, again, AAU member, but you're not really going to get excited. And I have the utmost respect for the Fighting Matt Campbells, but let's face it. I mean, it's not, that's not something to, in comparison to Texas and Oklahoma. So it really does come down to, if you're going to move, like as the late Horace Greeley once said, "Go west, young man." That's kind of the direction. It's like, but how far west do you want to go? Do we want to truly become when I say we, the Big Ten, thinking for themselves, a truly national conference where we go from coast to coast, including, some potentially some current Pac-12 members. I think I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I just think there's got to be some well thought out rationale for it. Like you said very well, you don't want to just expand just to expand. I think it has to be the right fit for the right reasons. And right now, I think everyone's still trying to kind of catch their breath after the news of Texas and Oklahoma, and trying to figure out, all right, if we're going to expand, what do we want to do, and how do we want to do it?
Right. You look at this, and I think the only one that gets excited about inviting Kansas to the Big Ten are the Rutgers of the world, the Marylands, the teams that might be able to get an extra win if they play them. It's not enticing. I think that something that might make sense would be a Big Ten Pac-12 merger, to where everybody would play out their season, choose a winner from each region, and then play a sort of a mega championship game between the traditional winner of the Big Ten and the traditional winner of the Pac-12, to determine like the conference, I guess the super conference champion, if you like. That's something that could work, but again, I don't know how that would work. That would just be more or less an alliance, not a merger per se, because again, if the Big Ten is going to stick to its academic guns, as it were, and say you need to be AAU members, not all the Pac-12 teams qualify for that. So at this point, I don't see any point to doing anything just to do something. It's certainly possible that things could change, that the Big Ten could change their requirements. It's, who knows what's going to happen once the domino starts falling. But I think the thing that makes the most sense, and again, this is why it will never happen, is the addition of Notre Dame, because then Notre Dame has an opportunity to play for a conference champion and a conference championship, and therefore get that bye in the playoff if they manage to get it. But there's really no other incentive for Notre Dame to do it, so I don't see it happening, and I don't understand why everybody just. And I've seen this. I've even seen this from Maurice Clarett today. Ohio State should leave the Big Ten and go to the SEC. Why?
Now that I did not see. I with all respect to Maurice Clarett, who obviously, as a former Ohio State great, he's entitled to his opinion, but I didn't see that. Speaking of former Ohio State players, because I have a lot of respect for anyone who has ever worn that uniform, Bobby Carpenter has been very, very on social media, wanting the Big Ten to target Clemson and Florida State, even though he's very well aware of the whole ACC grant of rights issue that we've been discussing. So I completely agree with you about the Notre Dame thing. It makes too much sense. I'm sure you remember back in 1999, and the only reason is, just because I remember thinking, man, that's going to be so strange with Notre Dame in the Big Ten. But Notre Dame, in essence, said, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, like they didn't say it that succinctly, but I mean, they very publicly turned down Big Ten membership, well over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now I would have, let me put it this way. I would believe that Notre Dame would be more receptive to joining a conference if the proposed college football playoff expansion news had not come out about, what I mean? Like the fact that Notre Dame could possibly still host like not necessarily have to be a conference champion to be able to host games. Like if it was still like, okay, well, you're only you can only get in if you're a conference champion or whatever that might be, kind of whatever kind of rules that might have existed, Notre Dame might have been more receptive. I think the fact that their athletic director was very involved in the drafting of what the playoffs going to look like, kind of making sure that Notre Dame was taken care of. That's why I think Notre Dame is going to sit this one out.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't really know what that expansion will look like at this point, so, I mean, that's still in flux also. But what Maurice was responding to was the SB Nation website, bcinterruption.com, that covers Boston College, ran a story today that Mark Ryan of ESPN was reported by ESPN that Clemson and Florida State have reached out to the Southeastern Conference about joining their membership. Now, we talked about the ACC's situation. I believe that they would still have to get out of contracts, and that would require lawyers and that kind of thing. But that could happen.
It could happen, but
it'd
be. Let's just say it's going to be very expensive. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but let's go back to where we kind of started with the Big 12. I mean, the Big 12, they're definitely lawyering up for what all these accusations against against ESPN, against Texas and Oklahoma. Like they're basically they're not going to give up Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12, even though it's very messy and not very probably not something that Texas and Oklahoma's administration thought when they signed. But the possibility of some very ugly court proceedings, the Big 12 is not going to just let them walk away. I think there's going to be some big money checks that are going to have to be written before this is all settled.
Right. It should be noted that there has been there were some updates to the story. Someone close to the Clemson program reported that was not true, that they weren't looking into that. But anyway, this is what Maurice did, was he retweeted a picture of the headline, Clemson and Florida State reportedly reach out to SEC about joining the conference. And he said, just reading his tweet here, Ohio State football needs to go to the SEC, leave the Big Ten behind, go and line up with the best of the best. But, I mean, Ohio State does that. It's called the college football playoff.
Yeah, I would be naive if I didn't believe. I mean, because the results speak for themselves. Now granted, the college football playoff, you're right. When you look at the sheer dominance that the SEC has had in the college football playoff era, and before that the BCS. I mean, it would, we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't say, yeah, the SEC, they are the best conference in college football. But I don't think, I give Ohio State a lot of credit for the fact that, we keep talking about AAU membership. I mean, that they compete against SEC teams in the college football playoff, but they also want to be part of something, on the academic pursuit. And, let's face it, like the SEC, that's not something that I obviously Vanderbilt would come to mind, but I don't really think of like well regarded institutes of higher learning within the SEC footprint. Like within the Big Ten. Yeah, I mean that's kind of it's like they want the best of both worlds, and I give Ohio State a lot of credit for wanting to be there. I mean, I also respect where Maurice Claret is coming from. Thank you by the way, for bringing up the fact that Clemson is denying that. I think that grant of rights, it makes makes sense for Clemson and Florida State even to want to be in the SEC. But guess what? Like that contract, that would be, very expensive to break out of.
Yeah, the thing that doesn't make sense about that, though, and again, we don't know that, we just hear a report. We don't have any solid evidence on this, and it's been refuted at least by one report. But the thing is that Clemson is in a very similar position to what Oklahoma is in that it's almost a guaranteed school to get in the college football playoff year after year, and all they have to do is not, shoot themselves in the foot. And they're not hurting for recruiting. They're not like missing out on big time recruits. I think that they're fine. Of course, if Dabo were to leave, that might change, but I think that they're in a pretty good position. FSU, I'm not really sure why anybody would want FSU at this point.
Yeah, FSU, I mean, they've been, well, I'd be remiss if we talked about Jimbo Fisher earlier. I mean, he did win the national title 8 years ago for the 2013 season, and he did have Florida State in the college football playoff the next year. And then after that, I mean, it just kind of slowly and surely went downhill. And I don't know if it was Jimbo Fisher just losing interest or not able to pull the talent that he needed. But I mean, Jimbo Fisher left Florida State kind of a smoldering mess that they're slowly, you're closer to it than I am. So
yeah.
I can't,
well,
I mean, like they're trying to rebuild, but it's not easy.
As near as I could tell, to me, what happened, and I could be wrong, I'm not inside the program or anything, it seemed like they did a very poor job recruiting in a particularly important position groups. Maybe that was assistant coaching misfires. Maybe they brought in coaches that were good coaches but couldn't recruit. But that affected the entirety of the team. And when you're getting beat up in the trenches, that's a big problem, especially when you have an offense like Jimbo likes to run. If they didn't have good offensive linemen, for example, at Texas A&M right now, they would still be garbage there. But the offensive line was a big problem. I don't know why it hasn't rebounded. Certainly this is it's a known, established brand, Florida State, but they're losing the recruiting wars. They're losing guys to Florida. They're losing them to out-of-state schools. They're even losing them to UCF on occasion. So I think that there's some issues there. But again, if you're the SEC, you're not dying to let FSU in, and certainly if you're the Florida Gators, you don't want that.
No, not at all. I just think, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the whole Gene Smith did not really elaborate, and because I respect, he's kind of in an awkward position, a challenging position in the sense that he needs to represent the best for Ohio State athletics, but also to kind of speak his mind candidly about the state of college football. And for Gene Smith to say, to kind of potentially, to paraphrase it, to pause on the college football playoff expansion talk because of the realignment with Texas and Oklahoma, that it's kind of thrown things out of whack. I agree with that. I as much as I want to see it and believe that the college football playoff should be expanded, and I believe it will be expanded eventually. I think with all of the uncertainty about the longevity of certain conferences like the Big 12, it certainly is a legitimate reason to kind of say, why don't we slow down on expanding the playoff? Because, the idea of ESPN getting to control and govern the college football playoff, while also what is, going to be controlling the television rights to the SEC. It just seems as though, you might be stacking the deck against yourselves. Like that's kind of where Fox, like that's why, we talked about it. And again, our listeners know, if they've listened to anything on the other podcasts for the Buckeye Scoop, that Fox is, they're trying to look out for their best interests. So when it comes to, the Big Ten and maybe the Pac-12, like you said, like maybe that alliance, maybe that merger, whatever it might be, like they might be trying to kind of safeguard what they consider their most valuable property.
Yeah, and there might be something different that happens, completely different than anything we could anticipate. Maybe we're headed to different levels of college football in the way that, let's say, European soccer has. With, you have your tier one, all your blue bloods, and then you have your second level and your third level, and then kind of like I'm not going to say promotion relegation, because I think that Americans are just resistant to that as a general rule, but having a league where this is your championship is going to be decided amongst these 16 teams year in and year out, and then you got the next level, and then you get the level below that. Maybe the third level is what we call the group of the group of five now, or whatever. It's hard to say what could happen, but everything's moving in a strange and quick direction, and at some point, I think anything could happen. I don't think there's just going to be an SEC champion and then a national champion for the rest of the world. But I think I could see a situation where the top schools break off and say, "All right, well, this is just ludicrous, because why are we dragging Arkansas and Mississippi State along for the ride, and Vanderbilt? Why don't we just settle this amongst the best schools?" That seems to be almost where we're headed with this thing that's going on.
Yeah, I certainly agree that there's, to use your term, a breaking away from the traditional NCAA model or manner of doing things. I certainly think that is certainly approaching. I don't know when, but I think the idea of, as you said, regardless of whether it's kind of like along the lines of like that European football, style of relegation, or, but being able to determine, all right, we're going to have these 16 teams or whatever it might be, since we're talking about, like the proposed is 12, right? Like 12 teams in a playoff.
Yeah.
How that's determined. I think everything's in flux. I don't think anything is set.
Yeah, it could just end up being like what this European Soccer Super League was supposed to be like, where all the best teams from all the various leagues they were going to break off and form their own thing, and it was all money driven, and I could totally see that happening here. But again, you do have a few schools like the Ohio States that are like, wait a minute, we're an academics institution, and that doesn't fly with us. And of course, in the modern sports landscape, that's a little bit of archaic thinking, but on some level, at least as an Ohio State alum, it kind of makes you proud that they stick to some semblance of, higher standards than what we see out of the SEC. But, on another level, it's like, well, but that's why you're not competing at the highest level. That's why you're always fighting for scraps and looking up at Alabama.
Yeah, don't forget, we are, less than 6 months removed from Ohio State playing for the national championship. I mean, like they know.
How did that go?
It didn't go well. It didn't go well, but I'm just saying that they were, all things considered. I mean, I think we're too close to it now, but I think years from now, I don't know how many, so don't try and pin me down to but it's the kind of thing where years from now, when we reflect and think back on everything that the 2020 season brought, and how Ohio State and Ryan Day were able to successfully navigate through all the different challenges, so many of which were not of their creation, and they were still able to get to the national championship game. Now, granted, they were soundly defeated by a team that I think, in all fairness, I think you could have thrown in any of the other college football playoff participants and had a comparable result. I really don't think Ohio State embarrassed themselves in the sense that I think that Alabama team was just a juggernaut. So I think that the recruiting is certainly getting to the point where Ohio State can't they really don't have to apologize. They don't have to take a backseat to anybody. So I think we're gearing up for, we talked about at the beginning of, some extraordinary quarterback talent. Obviously a young, dynamic, very creative offensive mind in Ryan Day as the head coach. We'll see kind of where realignment takes the Big Ten. Like you said, do they have to? I don't know if they have to, but will they expand to try and keep pace? We'll see. But I think Ohio State's well positioned for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think so too. And honestly, if you go back to that national championship game and you look at some of the key players that were out for Ohio State, and the fact that they lost Trey Sermon on the first play of the game, which was a huge part of their game plan, I think that could have been a much closer game. I'm not saying Ohio State would have beaten Alabama, but they could have avoided a very lopsided score, perhaps, had they had certain guys, not in COVID protocol and things like that. But it's going to be interesting to watch. It just seems insane that we're talking about this a month from the season starting.
Yeah, kind of where we started at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah,
that everything was relatively quiet and mundane.
Yeah,
when you think about it. It was like, oh, thank goodness, there's nothing really going on except recruiting visits. Yeah. And that's it. And then the next thing you know, it's like, okay, boom, all right.
You had a few camps, you got some visits, they're opening up some visits, and people are taking official visits and unofficial visits, and they're starting to move around and look at schools. And then it's like that meme from the TV show Community, where Donald Glover walks in from getting the pizzas and everything's on fire in the apartment.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's kind of where we are right now. It's the Kiss song from the Lick It Up album, All Hell's Breaking Loose, Chip.
There you go. That's what they should be, that's what they should be playing whenever, they have, on, I don't care if we're talking. Well, my lack of confidence in Kevin Warren, that we could talk about that next week, or maybe never, because I'd rather not talk about my lack of confidence. But yeah, we could have that as that could be Kevin Warren's theme song, whenever he takes the stage.
Yeah. Sounds good. We're not going to solve this today, but we will keep our eyes on it, Chip, and of course we will have our reactions to any new developments that come up, because we'll be back in our weekly preparation for the upcoming season. We'll get together next week. We'll have another show. We'll be back the week after that. We'll probably have our Western Conference Big Ten preview, then our Eastern Conference Big Ten preview, and then we'll be gearing up for Minnesota. We'll be in Minnesota week. So the fact that we can see that light at the end of the tunnel means that the college football season is upon us.
Yeah, it's always, after everything from last year, it can't get here soon enough. You know what I mean? That's all I can say is that to know, like you said, that a month from now we've got, honest to goodness, fans in the stands. College football is an exciting time.
Yeah, really is. I'm excited about this, but we've got so much going on. We've got the Quinn Ewers watch. We've got the realignment watch, and we had planned on talking about other things, but there's just so much to unpack from these two things, and you and I have been apart for a while, so it was good to catch up with you. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on the interwebs?
Yes, I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And besides doing this podcast with Michael, like as Michael said, we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis now with the football season upon us. I also am an occasional contributor to Athlon Sports.
Yeah, I like those occasions. Those are good occasions when you are in Athlon Sports. You can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. Give me a follow on Twitter. I've lost some followers over the summer, Chip. I don't know why, but
I don't know why either.
I haven't tweeted a lot, but apparently people didn't like my tweets. I guess I don't know. I don't remember being terribly inflammatory, but yeah, so this kind of happens every summer. I'll lose followers over the summer, and then when I start doing a lot more tweeting about Ohio State in the fall, that tends to bring numbers back up to like where they were. So anyway, that's where I'm at on Twitter. You can find me there. Give me a follow, say hello, and you can ask us questions there too on Twitter. I am at Mike36Fan. You are at Chip Minnich, Minnich, and you can ask us questions there, and we will we'll answer them here on the next show if you do that. So hit us up. Also, of course, I'm at Buckeye Scoop, and you'll want to. This is the time, if you haven't already done it, become an insider. Just get a subscription to Buckeye Scoop, and you're going to get all kinds of cool stuff in the coming weeks. I'm sure there'll be position battles revealed on our insiders board before they become public. So if that stuff interests you, what is it Tom says? For about the cost per month of a single cheap
pizza,
national chain pizza, you can be an insider and get all that information before all your friends do. So you'll want to do that. But at BuckeyeScoop.com, I am the grumpy old Buckeye, and I will give you my unique spin on all of the things that made me want to shake my fist at clouds when the Buckeyes play. I think that's going to do it, Chip. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
No, I'm looking forward to talking with you more frequently now that college football is getting closer and closer. Certainly hope that everyone has enjoyed the off season because, in my opinion, with fall camp starting, we're in it. We're ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. This was the first off season that you and I tried to podcast through, and I think we did a pretty good job for a while, but in the end, the off season won.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to, again, when the vast majority of the news was recruiting oriented and not even an abundance of recruiting information, it was kind of difficult to, truly manufacture topics. I think even the other podcast hosts would probably off the record say, yeah, it's like, trying to find, significant conversation pieces, was challenging. So yeah, I'd give us high marks for our effort at least.
Yeah. And of course we don't want to just mimic what the other podcasts on Buckeye Scoop are doing. We could have come in with our bold prediction show, and we could have, done that kind of thing and done our tail of the tape with Michigan, but that's not who we are. We figured that's covered. We're going to let those guys do their thing, and we'll do our thing, and we don't necessarily need to step on their feet. And of course, Buckeye Weekly, they covered the recruiting pretty well this off season. The Sloopcast, they've got their fingers in it, and of course, we've got the recruiting experts with their own podcast. So there was no need for you and I to wade into that pool because we were, that's a pool that we're not really good at swimming in.
Right. And I figure, speaking of the Tale of the Tape podcast that Tony and Tom do, I figure I don't need any of Gerd's hate mail. He can have that all to himself. So
yeah, you don't need any angry Michigan fans up in your mentions.
Precisely.
Yeah, I think it's funny, but that's just me. All right, Chip, you and I'm going to sincerely say this. We'll be back next week, and we'll have more to discuss and unpack as we get into the season, or into the camp at least, and prepare for the season. And then, of course, like I said, the week after that, we'll go through the Western Conference, take a look around, and let you know what we see. And we'll do the same for the East the week after that. And the week after that, it's game week. So it's here. It's all happening. We've pretty much made it through the off season. We've got football at the end of the tunnel. Like I said, we're 1 month out from the first game as you and I record this podcast. And I'm very excited. I'm not the least of which is the first thing we talked about this in this podcast is the quarterback battle and how that shapes up. So every time you go through this and your quarterback leaves and goes to the NFL or runs out of eligibility, whatever happens, that's a very exciting time. But I don't think we've ever seen anything like this, and we may never see anything like this again with this insane amount of talent and all of it freshman level talent.
It's going to be interesting. Keep your eyes and ears open. If you are not a Buckeye Scoop member, can't endorse it enough.
Yeah.
Do yourself a favor.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said freshman level. I should have said freshman eligibility. Yeah. So, in terms of eligibility, they're all freshmen. So, anyway, like I said, we'll be back and do it again next week. And until then, be sure to check out all the other podcasts on the Buckeye Scoop family of shows, the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network, as it were. And make sure you become an insider. And we'll see you next week. The only thing we have left to do is what we do at the end, Chip, and that is to say, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.